Guys, today we're going to be reading chapters 8 and 9 of The Giver. Um, don't worry, you're not going to be doing two separate digital journals for chapter 8 and one for chapter 9. It's going to be one digital journal for the two chapters together. I think this is an appropriate spot to leave off for our spring break here. So your responses are probably going to be a little bit longer as far as like the gist goes. If you want to separate that as like a chapter 8 gist, blah, 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 and then a chapter 9 gist, blah, blah, blah. You can do that. You don't have to do two separate themes. You can find themes that like the same theme for the two chapters, or if you want to do two separate themes, you can do that. You could do, but I do want two pieces of evidence, one from chapter 7 or chapter 8 and one from chapter 9. Just say like chapter 8 evidence, blah, 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 chapter 9 evidence. However you want to set that up. And in your questions, of course, you can say in chapter 8 this and chapter 9 that, but it could be a little bit longer one, so let's get going. The audience was clearly ill at ease. They applauded at the final assignment, but the applause was piecemeal. No longer a crescendo of united enthusiasm. There were murmurs of confusion. Jonas moved his hands together, clapping, but it was an automatic, meaningless gesture that he wasn't even aware of. His mind had shut out all of the earlier emotions, the anticipation, excitement, pride, and even the happy kinship with his friends. Now he only felt humiliation and terror. The chief elder waited until the uneasy applause subsided. Then she spoke again. "I know," she said in her vibrant, gracious voice, "that you are all concerned, that you feel I have made a mistake." She smiled. The community, relieved from its discomfort, very slightly by her benign statement, seemed to breathe more easily. It was very silent. Jonas looked up. "I have caused you anxiety," she said. "I apologize to my community." Her voice flowed over the assembled crowd. "We accept your apology," they all uttered together. "Jonas," she said, looking down at him, "I apologize to you in particular. I caused you anguish." "I accept your apology," Jonas replied shakily. "Please come to the stage now." Earlier that day, dressing in his own dwelling, he had practiced the kind of jaunty, self-assured walk that he hoped he could make to the stage with when his turn came. All of that was forgotten now. He simply willed himself to stand, to move his feet that felt weighted and clumsy, to go forward, up the steps, and across the platform until he stood at her side. Reassuringly, she placed her arm across his tense shoulders. "Jonas has not been assigned," she informed the crowd, and his heart sank. Then she went on. "Jonas has been selected." He blinked. What did that mean? He felt a collective questioning stir from the audience. They, too, were puzzled. In a firm, commanding voice, she announced, "Jonas has been selected to be our next receiver of memory." Then he heard the gasp, the sudden intake of breath, drawn sharply in astonishment by each of the seated citizens. He saw their faces, the eyes widened in awe. And still he did not understand. "Such a selection is very, very rare," the chief elder told the audience. "Our community has only one receiver. It is he who trains his successor. We have had our current receiver for a very long time," she went on. Jonas followed her eyes and saw that she was looking at one of the elders. The committee of elders was sitting together in a group, and the chief elder's eyes were now on one who sat in the midst but seemed oddly separate from them. It was a man Jonas had never noticed before, a bearded man with pale eyes. He watched Jonas intently. "We failed in our last selection," the chief elder said solemnly. "It was 10 years ago when Jonas was just a toddler. I will not dwell on that experience because it causes us all terrible discomfort." Jonas didn't know what she was referring to, but he could sense the discomfort in the audience. They shifted uneasily in their seats. "We have not been hasty this time," she continued. "We could not afford another failure. Sometimes," she went on, speaking now in a lighter tone, relaxing attention in the auditorium, "we are not entirely certain about the assignments, even after the most painstaking observations. Sometimes we worry that the one assigned might not develop, through training, every attribute necessary. 11s are still children after all. What we observe as playfulness and patience, the requirements to become nurturer, could, with maturity, be revealed as simply foolishness and indolence. So we continue to observe during training and to modify behavior when necessary. But the receiver in training cannot be observed, cannot be modified. That is stated quite clearly in the rules. He is to be alone, apart, while he is prepared by the current receiver for the job which is the most honored in our community. Alone, apart, Jonas listened with increasing unease. Therefore, the selection must be sound. It must be a unanimous choice of the committee. They can have no doubts, however fleeting. If, during the process, an elder reports a dream of uncertainty, that dream has the power to set a candidate aside instantly. Jonas was identified as a possible receiver many years ago. We have observed him meticulously. There were no dreams of uncertainty. He has shown all the qualities that a receiver must have. With her hand still firmly on his shoulder, the chief elder listed the qualities. Intelligence, she said. We are all aware that Jonas had been a top student throughout his school days. Integrity, she said next. Jonas has, like all of us, committed minor transgressions. She smiled at him. We expect that. We hoped, also, that he would present himself promptly for chastisement, and he has always done so. Courage, she went on. Only one of us here today has ever undergone the rigorous training required of a receiver. He, of course, is the most important member of the committee. The current receiver, it was he who reminded us again and again of the courage required. Jonas, she said, turning to him, speaking in a voice that the entire community could hear, the training required of you involves pain, physical pain. He felt fear flutter within him. You have never experienced that. Yes, you have scraped your knees and fallen from your bicycle. Yes, you have crushed your finger in a door last year. Jonas nodded, agreeing, as he recalled the incident and its accompanying misery. But you will be faced now, she explained gently, with a pain of magnitude that none of us here can comprehend because it is beyond our experience. The receiver himself was not able to describe it, only to remind us that you would be faced with it, that you would need immense courage. We cannot prepare you for that. But we feel certain that you are brave, she said to him. He did not feel brave at all, not now. The fourth essential attribute, the chief elder said, is wisdom. Jonas has not yet acquired that. The acquisition of wisdom will come through his training. We are convinced that Jonas has the ability to acquire wisdom. That is what we looked for. Finally, the receiver must have one more quality, and it is one which I can only name but not describe. I do not understand it. You members of the community will not understand it either. Perhaps Jonas will, because the current receiver has told us that Jonas already has this quality. He calls it the capacity to see beyond. The chief elder looked at Jonas with a question in her eyes. The audience watched him too. They were silent. For a moment he froze, consumed with despair. He didn't have it, whatever she had said. He didn't know what it was. Now was the moment when he would have to confess, to say, "No, I don't. I can't," and throw himself on their mercy, ask for their forgiveness, to explain that he had been wrongly chosen and that he was not the right one after all, at all. But when he looked out across the sea of faces, the thing happened again. The thing that had happened with the apple. They changed. He blinked, and it was gone. His shoulders straightened slightly. Briefly, he felt a tiny sliver of sureness for the first time. She was still watching him. They all were. "I think it's true," he told the chief elder and the community. "I don't understand it yet. I don't know what it is. But sometimes I see something, and maybe it's beyond." She took her arm from his shoulders. "Jonas," she said, speaking to him alone, but to the entire community of which he was a part, "you will be trained to be our next receiver of memory. We thank you for your childhood." Then she turned and left the stage, left him there alone, standing and facing the crowd, which began spontaneously the collective murmur of his name. "Jonas." It was a whisper at first, hushed, barely audible. "Jonas, Jonas." Then louder, faster. "Jonas, Jonas, Jonas." With the chant, Jonas knew the community was accepting him and his new role, giving him life, the way he would had given to the new child Caleb. His heart swelled with gratitude and pride. But at the same time he was filled with fear. He did not know what his selection meant. He did not know what he was to become or what would become of him. So that's the end of chapter 8. We're going to get on to chapter 9 here too. Now, for the first time in his 12 years of life, Jonas felt separate. Different. He remembered what the chief elder had said, that his training would be alone and apart. But his training had not yet begun, and already, upon leaving the auditorium, he felt the apartness. Holding the folder she had given him, he made his way through the throng, looking for his family unit and for Asher. People moved aside for him. They watched him. He thought he could hear whispers. Ash, he called, spotting his friend near rows of bicycles. Ride back with me? Sure, Asher smiled, his usual smile, friendly and familiar, but Jonas felt a moment of hesitation from his friend, an uncertainty. Congratulations, Asher said. You too, Jonas replied. It was really funny when she told about the smacks. You get more applause than almost anybody else. The other new 12s clustered nearby, placing their folders carefully into the carrying containers on the backs of the bikes. In each dwelling tonight, they would be studying the instructions for the beginning of their training. Each night for years, the children had memorized the required lessons for school, often yawning with boredom. Tonight, they would all begin eagerly to memorize the rules for their adult assignments. Congratulations, Asher, somebody called. Then hesitation began. Again, you too, Jonas. Asher and Jonas responded with congratulations to their groupmates. Jonas saw his parents watching him from the place where their own bicycles were waiting. Lily had already been strapped into her seat. He waved, they waved back, smiling, but he noticed that Lily was watching him solemnly, her thumb in her mouth. He rode directly to his dwelling, exchanging only small jokes and unimportant remarks with Asher. See you in the morning, Recreation Director, he called, dismounting by the door as Asher continued on. Right, see you, Asher called back. Once again, there was just a moment when things weren't quite the same, weren't quite as they had always been through the long friendship. Perhaps he had imagined it. Things couldn't change with Asher. The evening meal was quieter than usual. Lily chattered about her plans for volunteer work. She would begin, she said, at the nurturing center, since she was already an expert at feeding Gabriel. I know, she added quickly when her father gave her a warning glance. I won't mention his name. I know I'm not supposed to know his name. I can't wait for tomorrow to come, she said happily. Jonas sighed uneasily. I can, he muttered. You've been greatly honored, his mother said. Your father and I are very proud. It's the most important job in the community, father said. But just the other night you said that the job of making assignments was the most important. Mother nodded. This is different. It's not a job, really. I never thought, never expected. She paused. There's only one receiver. But the chief elder said that they had made a selection before and it failed. What was she talking about? Both of his parents hesitated. Finally, his father described the previous selection. It was very much as it is today. Jonas, the same suspense as 111 had been passed over when the assignments were given. Then the announcement when they singled out the one. Jonas interrupted. What was his name? His mother replied, her, not his. It was a female. But we are never to speak the name or use it again for a new child. Jonas was shocked. A name designated not to be spoken indicated the highest degree of disgrace. What happened to her? He asked nervously, but his parents looked blank. We don't know, his father said uncomfortably. We never saw her again. A silence fell over the room. They looked at each other. Finally, his mother, rising from the table, said, You've been greatly honored, Jonas, greatly honored. Alone in his sleeping room, prepared for bed, Jonas opened his folder at last. Some of the other 12s, he had noticed, had been given folders thick with printed pages. He imagined Benjamin, the scientific male in his group, beginning to read pages of rules and instructions with relish. He pictured Fiona smiling her gentle smile as she bent over the list of the duties and methods that she would be required to learn in the days to come. But his own folder was startlingly close to empty. Inside, there was only a single printed sheet. He read it twice. Jonas, receiver of memory. 1. Go immediately at the end of the school hours each day to the annex entrance behind the House of the Old, and present yourself to the attendant. 2. Go immediately to your dwelling at the conclusion of training hours each day. 3. From this moment, you are exempted from rules governing rudeness. You may ask any question of any citizen and you will receive answers. 4. Do not discuss your training with any other members of the community, including parents and elders. 5. From this moment, you are prohibited from dream telling. 6. Except for illness or injury unrelated to your training, do not apply for any medication. 7. You are not permitted to apply for release. And 8. You may lie. Jonas was stunned. What would happen to his friendships, his mindless hours of playing ball or riding his bike along the river? Those had been happy and vital times for him. Were they to be completely taken from him now? The simple logistic instructions, where to go and when, were expected. Every 12 had to be told, of course, where and how and when to report for training. But he was a little dismayed at his schedule, left no time, apparently, for recreation. The exemption from rudeness startled him. Reading it again, however, he realized that it didn't compel him to be rude. It simply allowed him the option. He was quite certain he would never take advantage of it. He was so thoroughly accustomed to courtesy within the community that the thought of asking another citizen an intimate question, of calling someone's attention to an area of awkwardness, was unnerving. The prohibition of dream telling, he thought, would not be a real problem. He dreamed so rarely that the dream telling did not come so easily to him anyway, and he was glad to be excused from it. He wondered briefly, though, how to deal with it at the morning meal. What if he did dream? Should he simply tell his family unit, as he did so often? Anyway, that he hadn't, that he would be a lie, that would be a lie. Still, the final rule said, well, he wasn't quite ready to think about the final rule on the page. The restriction of medication unnerved him. Medication was always available to citizens, even to children, through their parents. When he had crushed his finger in the door, he had quickly, gasping into the speaker, notified his mother. She had hastily requisitioned relief of pain medication, which had promptly been delivered to his dwelling. Almost instantly, the excruciating pain in his hand had diminished to the throb, which was now all he could recall of the experience. Rereading rule number 6, he realized that a crushed finger fell into the category of unrelated to training. So if it ever happened again, and he was quite certain it wouldn't, he had been very careful near heavy doors since the accident. He could still receive medication. The pill he took now, each morning, was also unrelated to training, so he would continue to receive the pill. But he remembered uneasily what the chief elder had said about the pain that would come with his training. She had called it indescribable. Jonas swallowed hard, trying without success to imagine what such pain might be like, with no medication at all, but it was beyond his comprehension. He felt no reaction to rule number 7 at all. It had never occurred to him that any other circumstances ever he might apply for release. Finally, he steeled himself to read the final rule again. He had been trained since earliest childhood, since his earliest learning of the language, never to lie. It was an integral part of the learning of precise speech. Once, when he had been a 4, he had said, just prior to the midday meal at school, I'm starving. Immediately, he had been taken aside for a brief private lesson in language precision. He was not starving. It was pointed out he was hungry. No one in the community was starving, had ever been starving, would ever be starving. To say starving was to speak a lie. An unintentional lie, of course, but the reason for precision of language was to ensure that unintentional lies were never uttered. Did he understand that? They asked him, and he had. He had never within his memory been tempted to lie. Asher did not lie. Lily did not lie. His parents did not lie. No one did, unless now Jonas had thought that he had never had before. This new thought was frightening. What if others, adults, had upon becoming 12s received their instructions the same terrifying sentence? What if they had all been instructed, you may lie? His mind reeled, now empowered to ask questions of utmost rudeness, and promised answers. He could, conceivably, though it was almost unimaginable, ask someone, some adult, his father perhaps, do you lie? But he would have no way of knowing if the answer he received were true. All right. And that is the end of both chapters 8 and 9. So Jonas's new job, he's the receiver of memory. We don't exactly know what that means yet. We know that there's only one of them, and it's a very special job. So once you're done here, go ahead onto that digital journal and complete that work there. Like I said, you're not going to be doing two separate digital journals. You're just going to be doing one. Your gist can just include all of it as one, or you could do two separate ones if you want to do gist of chapter 8, gist of chapter 9, whatever you want to do, and include evidence from both chapters. You can have two separate themes if you want. You can have one theme if you want. Whatever works for you guys, whatever makes it makes sense to you at the time. All right, guys. If you have any questions, make sure that you're either using the GoGuardian chat, you're emailing me, and I'll see you guys later.